in the Mississippi, in the Ohio River, and I wrote about the Indians and George Rogers Clark. You know who he was?
Yes.
He conquered all the Northwest Territory, and well, I'll just tell you. She wrote it down. George Rogers Clark, Virginia paid his expenses because Virginia was interested in the Kentucky Territory. You know, the states along the western seaboard, they didn't own anything beyond, but it was all free territory, all west of them. They didn't know what was there. And Virginia got interested in Kentucky mainly by Daniel Boone. You know, you've heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
He explored Kentucky, and Virginia got interested in it. And then they were interested in the Northwest Territory. So they paid George Rogers Clark to hire 150 fighters and subdue the Northwest Territory. See, the Spanish controlled Mexico and Florida, and they were gradually coming up the Mississippi River. Mm-hmm. They were up to almost to St. Louis, controlling that Mississippi River. And the English, British, they controlled Canada and up in that territory. And the French, they were in there too. Quebec, see, that was French. Yep. And the English and the French, they had forts in Indiana, out Vincennes, and another fort. And so Virginia hired George Rogers Clark to take it over. So he went down on the Mississippi and stopped the Spanish from coming up. And then he subdued those forts, Kaskaskia and Vincennes, and behold, Virginia was in charge.
Mm-hmm.
So they said, we're going to give 150,000 acres, they call it Clark's Grant, here in Indiana. See, Clark County is mostly that Clark's Grant. 150,000 acres divided up among the men who were with George Rogers Clark. And so they done that, and they surveyed it into 500-acre sections. No, they didn't. They weren't sections. See, a section is 640 acres.
Okay.
That's legal. But they surveyed it into surveys, 500-acre surveys, and they were inaccurate. That's the reason they got these kinks in the road. Mm-hmm. You know, the Kingston Road out here.
Yep.
And a lot of these roads got kinks in them. They had to redo it, see, and start over again. Mm-hmm. And so Survey 70, that's where we're located here. It was supposed to go to Major Quirk. He was with George Rogers Clark. Now, the officers, they got hundreds, thousands of acres, but the ordinary soldiers, they only got maybe a couple hundred acres. Anyhow, Major Quirk got Survey 70. That's where we are. And George Rogers Clark was bankrupt. He had used some of his own money, and then Virginia, they didn't have any money to pay him. So he was bankrupt, and he was living down there in Clarksville in an old cabin, and he was an alcoholic. And he went to sleep drunk by the fire and burned his foot off, you know. Have you ever heard that?
No,
Yeah, he burned his foot drunk by the fire, and he finally had to go over and live with his sister over in, have you ever been in that estate over there? Well,
no.
It's a big old home his sister lived in Louisville.
Okay.
And he finished his life there. But anyhow, I guess when the land commission met in Kentucky, and they were going to sell all this land that wasn't occupied, and Major Quirk said, well, George Rogers Clark is bankrupt, sell Survey 70, because he got a lot of other surveys. He said, sell Survey 70 and give the money to George Rogers Clark, which I assume they did. But I don't know. About 20 years ago, there's a woman came visiting from the library in Indianapolis, the state library. And she said they had got a letter from somebody named Clark. I don't know what state he lived in. It was on the East Coast. And he had this information that George Rogers Clark was supposed to get Survey 70 and some other things, and he didn't know whether it ever happened or not, and he wanted her to check it out.
Mm-hmm.
So she went all back to the records and gave me a lot of records, and mailed the information back to him. I don't know whether it suited him out, but I never did hear anything from him. Anyhow, the Land Commission sold Survey 70 at an auction, and a guy by the name of Sullivan, who was a land speculator down in Kentucky, and he bought a lot of land out of Clark's grant when they sold it. But he bought Survey 70 in 1789.
Okay.
1789 he bought it, and he sold it to in 1798 he sold it to a guy named Stewart, and Stewart owned some land in this following survey, and Stewart owned it just a few years, and he sold it to Thomas and Rebecca Downs. And Thomas Downs' wife Rebecca was a sister to that Stewart that owned this property. So Thomas Downs bought it in 1799.
Wow, 1799.
Mm-hmm. And Thomas Downs lived here and built this house. And well, I'll let you read the story. You want to read it, or you want me to read it to you?
Yeah, well, where are you at in the story here? See
if you can read my